So finally, then the question becomes, what can we do about all of this? And I think you can think of it in a couple of different levels. As an individual, the question often is, what should I do in terms of my career, or what should my children do in terms of preparing for this future? And the best answer I can give to that is to avoid things that are fundamentally routine or repetitive or most importantly, predictable. Remember, the central technology that we're dealing with here is machine learning, and that's basically about analyzing data and then making predictions. So if you're doing the kind of job that is predictable in the sense that someone else might be able to watch you do that job or study everything you've done in the past to do that job, then that's probably a job that ultimately is also going to be susceptible to automation. So I think the best way to avoid that personally is to do things that are more creative or things that involve sophisticated interaction and relationship building with people. Those things tend not to be something that are highly predictable. Another category of jobs are those that really require lots of dexterity and mobility, things like skilled trade jobs like electricians and plumbers. These are all jobs that I think are going to be very difficult to automate in the foreseeable future because they are not predictable. And they require capabilities that are very hard to build into robots. And so these are the kinds of things that I think as a worker you ought to focus on in terms of your own future, and also what you ought to be thinking about in terms of what your children are studying in school. So it's fine to give that kind of advice to individuals to adapt to this, but I think the much more interesting and important question is, what can we do as a society to adapt to this? Because I think it is pretty clear that although we might try to adapt, many people are very likely to be left behind by this. I think that going forward, we're going to see literally millions and millions of jobs impacted. Not everyone is going to succeed in transitioning to a job that can really avoid this trend, I don't think. And so ultimately, we're going to have to find a way to build an economy that works for everyone. I think that in the long run, that's probably going to require finding a way to decouple incomes from traditional forms of work. In other words, find a way to guarantee that everyone has got some livable amount of income, even if they're not able to find a job that provides that income. And the simplest, most straightforward way that I know to do that is probably going to be some kind of a guaranteed minimum income or a universal basic income. And this is an idea that actually has a fairly long history. People were talking about it going way back to the 1930s, but it is now getting a lot of traction. You may have heard Mark Zuckerberg talking about this, for example. There have been a number of important experiments, including here in Canada, that have been done with basic income, and in countries like Finland and the Netherlands. There's even a US presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, who's not one of the most famous candidates, but he's actually qualified for the Democratic debate that's going to happen in June. And his whole platform is all about a basic income and adaptation to the impact of automation. So this is an idea that is going to get, I think, a lot more exposure than it has in the past. I think to some extent it's even going to be injected into the presidential election campaign. So I think that's a very positive thing. It's really important that we all begin to think about this, because I personally think that it's almost inevitable that although it's very radical, it's almost hard to imagine, certainly a country like the US ever having something like a universal basic income. On the other hand, though, I think if you really understand the trends that seem likely to unfold and the impact that that's going to have, it seems to me that it's almost inevitable that somehow, some way, we're going to have to find a way to become more open to this and to make that transition, although I think it may be a very, very difficult and politically fraught transition to make.